world's leaders are getting together in the UK at the end of this month to discuss how to tackle climate change. Meanwhile, fuel prices are rising higher and higher. Oil prices are now over $85 and they continue to rise to $100 maybe. In the UK and Europe, gas is the problem. It's pushing up the price of heating, and some factories are having to close because their operations are no longer profitable. Gas prices are way higher than when they peaked in 2008. It's constrained supply that's the issue, partially because renewables are not performing as much as they might. In fact, wind, solar and hydro production has all fallen in the UK this year, whilst demand for power has increased. So we're facing an energy crunch. And how do we get out of it? That's today on the Debunking Economics podcast with Professor Steve Keen. I'm Phil Dobbie. Welcome along. Well, one way of getting out of this energy crunch is to use more coal and oil, and that's certainly what they're doing in China. In fact, in the UK as well. In Q2 this year, demand for energy increased by a quarter. Demand for petrol increased 41%, for gas by 25%, but electricity fell by 8%. Gas, the problem there was, whilst demand rose by a quarter, production fell by 41%, making the UK more reliant on imports, mainly from Russia, and hence the price crunch. And electricity production fell because renewable electricity generation fell. We had a 14% fall in Q2 in wind generation because of lower average wind speeds, and solar and hydro were also down because of the weather. Now, some of us have come to the realization that this is all short term. The long term, if we're going to help prevent climate change getting considerably worse, then we're going to have to consume less energy. Other people think that we can do it by simply switching to renewables without really compromising our lifestyle. Well, that doesn't seem to be working too well for us at the moment, does it? Boris Johnson is one of those people who thinks that can be achieved, though. But the UK this winter is going to be a country where it seems people will have to choose between whether they use energy or whether they consume food. Take your pick. I mean, Steve, even if we stuck with our current energy levels, can we really replace fossil fuels with renewables? It's not going too well at the moment.
Yeah, it's a big ask, and I think we've got nowhere near it. And in fact, when you look at what we call not so much renewable, but non-CO2 energy sources, fundamentally the major factor in that has been hydro for a long, long time. And then because of a substantial number of European countries went the nuclear route, particularly France, back in the 50s and early 60s. It's also nuclear. Now, we've had declining levels of nuclear, no increase in hydro since probably the 70s. And the result is that the level of renewable energy as part of total energy at the global level has never got past 15%. So 85% of what we consume in terms of energy is fossil fuel based. And what are your thoughts on nuclear? Do you think it's one alternative? Yeah, I mean, because I did my demos against nuclear power and nuclear weapons back in my youth, as most progressive, everyone did. Most lefties end up doing. That's true. And my point was always sort of a physics point, that how can you have a power station which is being irradiated, where the irradiation is going to damage the actual container vessels over time? How do you actually make that work in a reliable way? And so it's more of an engineering thought. I couldn't imagine that you would be able to have a sustainable system where the actually energy source itself was causing a degradation of the walls and so on of the containment vessels. Now, I have had 20 years of exposure to engineers since then, a lot through my Patreon supporters, of course, but also through people I know through academic circles, and they've convinced me that the modern technologies in nuclear reactors are far safer than they used to be, and need far less regulation costs because of that safety. And the real thing is if we can actually pump them out the same way we pump out ships, for example, out of a shipyard, rather than having to custom build each one and going through an enormous regulatory hoops as well, that it's quite possible this would be much safer, certainly safer than coal, because we know the extent to which coal leads to health problems, leads to deaths and so on, far more deaths from coal-fired power stations than nuclear in their entire history. So it's a long-winded answer, but basically I'm in favour of nuclear. My question marks come down to how fast we can roll it out. But even on that front, I've had some of my colleagues on Patreon tell me that they think that we could, within 10 years, with a concerted effort to build modern nuclear power stations, it would be feasible to have them replacing that 85% that's fossil fuel based in a matter of a decade. I still think there's got to be resource constraints. There've got to be problems about scaling up the production of those facilities that rapidly. But the overall argument, the energy density of nuclear is so much higher than anything else we've ever used, including oil, that if we can find a way of tapping it technologically successfully, then it gives the high density energy that was really the basis of developing Western civilization ever since we discovered coal and oil.
So the argument against nuclear, very often, apart from those concerns about what you do with the waste fuel and all that, is the cost of it. So and because it's expensive. Now it's interesting, isn't it? Because in the UK, there was talk about having it partially funded by a Chinese investment company that's basically owned by the Chinese government. So Chinese government created money was going to create a nuclear power station in Britain, whereas we could just create it with government money ourselves. The expense argument, if we accept the fact that governments can create money, it sort of goes away, doesn't it, unless it's using resources which are very scarce. The only issue is that we expect the private sector to supply so much of our fuel that it would be unfair for the government to step in and say, well, okay, we're going to fund this thing that's going to replace what you're making money out of. But then that raises the fundamental question, doesn't it? Should you allow the private sector to be responsible for supplying the energy for a nation? Well,
it also comes down to some of the simply accounting issues involved here, because if you've got to borrow the cost of capital of a corporation, and you've got something which is going to have a 30-year, 40-year life, and a long construction lead time as well, it ends up being that the cost of finance alone is the major reason why it's expensive. If you did the same thing where the government could simply say, well, you're going to be budgeting for the X amount of money for a nuclear power station this year, and it's not paying the borrowing costs, then that makes the public provision much cheaper than the private. And you can get the private sector, and they're saying, okay, we will pay the private sector to do it if necessary. If you find there's a private firm that's better at building nuclear reactors than the government itself, you finance it with government money, but you avoid the cost of finance and drastically reduce the cost that way.
Well, yeah, and it could be as simple as, and we were talking about this last week, weren't we? What they're doing in the United States. Let's just create $1 trillion coin. So it's going to cost $1 trillion for a nuclear power station. Someone's going to build it for us. We'll get that coin over to you this afternoon, just as soon as we've minted it.
Well, over to the central bank, and then the central bank will send you £1 trillion in £1 trillion in British notes. Yeah. So that's the real way it works. But yeah, it's something with the cost of finance and the cost of regulation. And again, I'm going from what my engineers tell me, the major factor in the high cost of nuclear, and it's feasible to have much lower cost nuclear, probably competitive with solar. The difference is that the sheer density of the energy means we can use the current distribution system we have for electric power, whereas if you do solar and you try to have solar on the roof and connect it to the grid, you can do it, but you're effectively trying to pump water from your house up to the dam, whereas the system was designed for the water to flow from the dam to your house. So the infrastructure we have at the moment for distributing electricity is much better suited to having a high power site, which then pumps the power down to the users rather than the reverse direction, which is what's required for a standard solar connected to the grid, running from people's personal installations.
Although, there are people talking about, this idea of local mesh networks where everyone's got solar and other forms of creating energy, and you share it amongst your neighborhood. But I've always thought that sounds like a neat idea, because we can equate it with the internet. But
the trouble is you don't, because the internet. The other thing with the internet is internet is global, your network is local. And if there's a cloud over your house, there's a cloud over your neighbour's house, and the energy level drops. So you have all these issues about the amount of extra capacity you need to cover the fact that solar is, for half the year, less than 12 hours a day, intermittent, not at all at night, et cetera, et cetera. Then you have to have more capacity. You've got to have battery storage. The hassle about energy is that it's the provision, the demand has to be almost identical to the supply, or vice versa. Supply has to be identical to the demand, and that makes much harder to handle than another commodity where you can actually store it in a warehouse for a while. When it's not sold, it doesn't degrade.
Well, does that mean that we need to change our approach to energy, and can we actually reach a sustainable future so long as we have a whole series of private companies supplying energy? Does it all need to be nationalised again? Listen to the full version of this podcast to the answer to that question and much more, looking at the energy crunch that we currently face in the UK, Europe and around the world. To hear it in full, you need to become a supporter of Steve Keen on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Prof Steve Keen, or you can go and subscribe at debunkingeconomics.com. We'll be back again with another one next week. I'm Phil Dobbie. Thanks for listening.